This video is sponsored by Squarespace. So this camera is the GFX 100S Mark II. This is the latest version, well, latest at the time of this video, the latest version of the GFX 100S. I very much enjoy using these 100S cameras for my landscape photography work. Really enjoyed using them for creating landscape images. And now that there's a new Mark II version, I need to set up and configure this camera for landscape photography. I need to change a bunch of settings on the camera. And by the way, just so you know, I did reset the camera body back to its default factory settings. So this camera is exactly the same as a new camera body that you take out of the box. I just wanted to do that to make sure there was no confusion when going through the menu system here and all that. So without further ado, let's jump into the menu and take a look at it. Okay, so here we are in the menu system of the GFX 100S Mark II, and this menu system will be similar for other GFX cameras as well. And I'd like to begin here with some recommended edits for the global settings on the camera. Now, a global setting is one that is used in every single shooting mode on the camera. You cannot override it or change it with a custom mode. You effectively set it once and that's it. Unless, of course, you go back and, make a change later. And I'd like to begin by coming down here to the network setup panel. And this should be off by default, but it's a good idea to check. Check the Bluetooth smartphone setting and make sure that Bluetooth is set to off. If you have no intention of using this camera with the Fujifilm smartphone app, which I do not use personally, it's just going to, consume battery life. So you may as well turn it off if you have no plans to use the smartphone app. Okay, the next one I recommend changing is in the setup menu. We come over here to the setup menu. This is the wrench icon. And by the way, I'm just using this, joystick on the back of the camera body here. And then come over here to screen setup, navigate down to Autorotate PB and set this to on. This will auto rotate portrait orientation images so that they appear right side up on the screen and in the viewfinder as well, instead of the default behavior, which is to effectively rotate the portrait image and display it lengthwise. Okay, the next setting I recommend editing is come down here to screen 3 and look for display custom setting. This controls the information that you see on the back of the preview screen here and through the viewfinder as well. It controls all the little bits of icons and text and all that stuff. Personally, I like for this to be as minimal as it can be because I don't like having stuff around the corners and edges of the frame, especially when I'm composing a landscape image. I want this to be as clean as possible while still providing useful information. So here's what works for me. I turn on framing guideline. We'll take a look at that in a minute. And then I also enable histogram. Histogram is a rather important thing to have. But then I disable shooting mode. I keep the aperture, shutter speed, ISO information, turn off information background, turn off focus mode. Actually, just turn all of this off. Off. I keep touchscreen mode just in case. All of this comes off too. And I keep movie mode and record time in case I need it when I'm shooting video. I can turn this off. I definitely keep mic levels so I can make sure that my audio is working again for when I'm shooting video. I just leave that. Guidance message off. I keep the warnings, but I do turn off the date and time and also keep the battery level just in case. And now it is much cleaner. There's less stuff. There's nothing across the top of the frame anymore. Nice to have like a little histogram here. Obviously, there's a histogram up here on the top of the camera body that you can enable, but I like seeing it on the screen as well. So for me, this is really all I need. Oh, and I forgot the framing guidelines. Now you may notice, maybe hard to see on the video, but there's now a 9-slice grid on the back of the screen here. And this helps with, composing, for rule of thirds and making sure that things are, aligned and balanced and all that. If you want to change that, well, if you don't want it, you can just come back in here to, display custom setting and disable it if you don't want it. But the place where this is controlled and customized is back here on screen 2 of the setup menu, and look for framing guideline. Come in here and you'll see grid 9, grid 24, and HD framing. 24 is too much for me. I don't really feel a need for that. HD framing is kind of like, video letterbox kind of style, but I like grid 9. So grid 9 is good for me. All right, another important thing to know about global settings on the camera is if we come over here to the setup menu and then go to button dial setting, you will see in here 2 options for function setting and command dial setting. Now these options here control what the various buttons do on the camera body. They control the functionality of the touchscreen on the back. This one here, command dial, this controls the wheels on the camera. It's worth spending some time experimenting with this just to make sure you get the camera body set up the way that you want it to be, what feels comfortable to you. But the other thing to know is that these are global settings. These will be used in every single shooting mode on the camera. So they're not something that you would customize with each one of the custom modes up here. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing. I would like to have the option of changing them for different shooting modes, but I kind of understand why these are global settings as opposed to custom settings. On my camera, I'm customizing these two buttons at top right to do something different. I'm changing the first to electronic level and the second to histogram. I like having electronic level assigned to a button because then I can quickly enable and disable it and check to see if my camera is level while establishing my composition. And then for histogram, I'm able to see a large histogram that includes all three color channels, red, green, and blue, in addition to luminance. I can check the color channels and make sure that I'm not clipping one of those individual color channels, which can be hard to see when you're just looking at a white histogram. Okay, so the GFX 100S supports 6 different custom shooting modes. There is C1 through C6 on the top mode dial up here, and those are 6 modes for photography and 6 modes for video. So when you flip the switch between movies and stills up here, the custom modes change. So you can, program them however you want, both for photography and video. So all told, there's like 12 custom modes, which is pretty cool. And by the way, part of the reason why I use custom modes, part of the reason why I recommend them is because then when I'm shooting, I'm not reusing settings from something that I used the camera for before. When I put it into a custom mode, I know exactly what I'm getting. I know exactly how the camera is set up, and I don't have to undo or, change anything from before. So I love using custom modes. It's primarily how I use the camera. Custom modes are not set up through the setup menu. You actually come up here to image quality. Why they're in here, I'm not exactly sure. There must be some logical reason for it, but they are all the way down here at the bottom of a screen 3 in the image quality menu. And you will see 2 options here. There is Edit Save Custom Setting and Auto Update Custom Setting. Now this option is super important to understand. Auto Update Custom Setting. Out of the box by default, it is set to Enable. What that does is automatically update whichever custom mode you have selected up here on the mode dial. It will automatically update that custom mode anytime you make a setting change on the camera. Anytime you go into the menu and make a change, anytime you change your exposure or change your drive mode or anything like that, it will automatically save that change to the selected custom mode, which is fine, I think, in the beginning when you are first creating custom modes, because it's easier, because then you're able to use the camera more naturally, shoot with it and see which settings you like and don't like, and everything is captured automatically to that custom mode. And then when you want to keep the custom mode as is and not change it at all, well, then you would come back here to Auto Update Custom Setting and set this to Disable. When you set it to Disable, it will no longer automatically update that custom mode. Instead, what it will do, let me just change a setting here on the camera really quick. Instead, what it will do when that is disabled is if you come in here to Edit, Save Custom Setting, you will see that C1 now has a red dot next to it. And that red dot means that there are changes that have been made to the camera that have not been saved to the custom mode. So if you power the camera off and back on, those changes will disappear, they will be thrown out, and the red dot will disappear. So if you have settings and you want to manually save them to the custom mode, you just come into it and then click Save Current Settings, or you can do Save the Changes, either one, and then they will be saved to the custom mode. So my recommendation here is, in the beginning, when you're first setting up the camera, I recommend setting this to Enable, the Auto Update setting, so that then you're able to build your custom modes however you want them to be. And then when you like your custom modes, turn this off. Set this to Disable, because it could cause problems later. So I'm going to keep this enabled for now because we're going to go into the menu system and make a bunch of changes, and everything that I change is going to be automatically captured. I like using Squarespace for publishing my photos online because their templates are very clean and simple, and I think they're just particularly well suited for viewing images. And I also love the fact that I don't have to worry about mobile. Like, web pages look great on mobile as well. Even though I definitely know how to code and how to design and build a website, I prefer using Squarespace because it is so simple and straightforward. and easy to use. And it's just one less thing for me to think about. It's so easy just to publish new images and to, start selling items like these. It's super simple. So if you are looking to build a brand new website, or maybe refresh the one that you currently have, if you have an old website that could use a refresh, definitely check out Squarespace. And you can do so absolutely free for 30 days. Kick the tires and see how it works for you by heading over to squarespace.com/Dominey. And then when you're ready to go live with your new site or register a new domain, use my last name, Dominey, to save 10% off your purchase. Okay, so the first custom mode I'm going to set up is C1. Now, C1 for me is shooting with the GFX 100S Mark II on a tripod, just shooting single images with the camera on a tripod. Okay, so let's begin setting up C1 here by going to the image quality menu, and then I'm going to begin with image quality, and I'm going to change this from fine, which is the default setting, to raw. I would imagine most of you probably want to shoot in raw as well. Obviously, you can change this so you shoot raw and JPEGs if you want to, but I shoot everything in raw, so I set it to that. And then we have raw recording. Now, one of the interesting things about Fujifilm cameras is that it provides different options for raw. You have compressed, uncompressed, and lossless. Lossless is effectively the same image quality that you get with uncompressed, but with a smaller file size. Compressed is a compressed version of lossless, where some loss of image quality may occur. So lossless is like a happy medium between the two. Then you have options here for 16-bit or 14-bit. Personally, I just keep it on 16-bit. I like shooting in that. So lossless 16-bit is good for me, and C1. Okay, my next recommended edit is on screen number 2 here, and I recommend changing white balance from auto to a fixed Kelvin value. I know lots of people shoot in, auto white balance. I used auto white balance for years, but I found over time from shooting video with a lot of the, the cameras that I own, that having a fixed color temperature just gives you more consistent results when you are capturing images instead of relying on the camera to set your white balance for you. So I just set it to 5600 Kelvin, which is, just the most neutral Kelvin value that you can get. Set it to that. And then I know that I am always shooting at 5600 Kelvin. The camera's not going to be changing auto white balance on me. I also find that these Fuji cameras get very, very yellow and orange, like they crank up the white balance and get very tungsten when shooting at blue hour early in the morning and late in the evening. And I just don't like seeing that on the, on the back of the screen either. So I just use, just straight up 5600 Kelvin at all times for my white balance. Okay, next setting in image quality is on screen 3. You want to change long exposure noise reduction to off. I prefer setting this to off because I would rather do my own noise reduction of my files after the fact in post, especially because we have, such sophisticated noise reduction software today that is available to us, and I'd rather the camera not be doing it for me. So I set that to off. Okay, for the next option, we're going to come back over here to the left menu and then go to autofocus. I pretty much just leave all of this as is, but I do change this AF plus MF setting, and I set this to on. What this allows you to do is use the manual focus ring on the lens when you are in auto exposure mode. So in other words, this will override auto exposure. You can set auto exposure by tapping on the back of the screen if you want to, but then use the manual dial here just to, dial it in just so. And I like having a little extra bit of control there. And to make this even better, I recommend coming down here to focus check, setting this to on, and then coming back up here to MF assist. Come into here and set this to focus peak highlight, change this to red high. You then press the shutter button down halfway and then turn the manual focus ring on the lens, and then you will see those red focus peaking highlights. So this is nice because you can use autofocus for to quickly jump to a particular area while you're composing a shot, and then use manual focus just to make sure that you're dialing in everything, and everything is exactly as sharp as you want it to be, and you're focusing exactly where you want it. Hey, this is me in the future. I'm jumping in here because I realized after editing this video that I forgot to mention anything about shooting modes and the exposure settings of the camera when you are setting up a custom mode. So as you may notice, when you turn the mode dial up here on top and you're switching between your custom modes, you no longer have access to aperture priority, shutter priority, program, manual, anything like that. You may be wondering, well, how exactly do I choose a shooting mode when I'm in a custom mode? Well, when you are creating your custom mode, it's really simple to do. You just press the Q button on the back of the camera here. And then at top left, you will see the different shooting modes: manual, program, shutter priority. Just choose whichever one works best for you. Generally speaking, I use aperture priority because I don't do a lot of long exposure photography. I, generally just set my ISO to the lowest value, dial in, whichever aperture, I want to use. And generally with these GF lenses, I generally shoot like around like f11, f16, something like that. That is, considered to be like around the sharpest point on the lens. And because I'm shooting landscapes and not like shallow depth of field images, I mean, that's always, just about right for me. Additionally, whatever setting you currently have assigned to shutter speed and exposure compensation are also saved to the custom mode. So if you are, say, creating a custom mode that uses shutter priority as the shooting mode, well, you want to make sure that whatever shutter speed you assign to that custom mode is reasonable, is like a typical value that you would use, because it's going to get really annoying if you switch into a shutter priority custom mode and then have to, speed up your shutter speed or slow it down because you saved it with a really weird value. So just make sure that it's a good general purpose value when you're assigning that. And also exposure compensation is also saved and captured. So you probably want to make sure that your exposure compensation is not compensating, is not, in the positive or the negative, is assigned to 0 when you were creating that custom mode, just to avoid headaches later on. Okay, next setting, press left on the joystick and then come down and select the shooting mode option. And then in here, we are going to set up a timer. Now, I like shooting with a timer for this C1 custom shooting mode because, again, I'm shooting with the camera on a tripod. I want the timer so that when I press and release the shutter button, the camera has like a couple of seconds in order to mitigate any vibrations, anything that may have happened when I was, holding onto the camera and pushing that button. It just gives it a couple of seconds to further stabilize. So we're going to turn on the self timer. I'm going to set this to 2 seconds and then set save self timer setting to on. Kind of a weird little setting, but when that is set to off, the self timer is not retained. It is not saved as part of the mode. It just automatically reverts to without a timer. So you have to turn that on to keep it. And then I'm going to set self timer lamp to off. This will turn off the blinking LED on the front of the camera. No one is going to want to see that when you're out shooting. It's just, there's really no point in having it. Also, while you're in here, check your ISO value. Now, this should be set to 80 by default. This is the minimum ISO of the GFX 100S Mark II. If you have another GFX camera, 100 may be your lowest option. That's perfectly fine. Because we're shooting on a tripod here, we can use a fixed ISO value in order to get, the least amount of noise in our image. So I keep this set to 80. IS mode. Now, IS mode, this is image stabilization. This controls the in-body image stabilization in the GFX 100S Mark II. And the IBIS system in here is fantastic. It's really good, but only when shooting handheld. This is not something you want to leave on when you're using the camera on a tripod. I think the cameras are intelligent enough to know when it's stabilized and when to enable IBIS or not. But in my opinion, and actually Fuji recommends disabling this in their camera manual. So I'm going to go with Fujifilm on this one and just disable it. I don't want IBIS when the camera is mounted to a tripod. It's already stabilized and I don't need anything inside of the camera body moving or causing any additional vibration. So I would recommend turning that off. Hey, this is me again in the future. Just want to quickly clarify something about image stabilization just to make sure there's no confusion. If you look in the menu system of your GFX camera and you do not see an option for off, what that likely means is that the lens that you currently have mounted to your camera has optical image stabilization, and there is a switch on the side of the lens. For example, this is a GF 45-100mm here, and this has an OIS switch on the side, OIS standing for optical image stabilization. So to disable image stabilization when shooting on a tripod, you just set this to off, and you'll notice in the menu system that IS mode is then disabled. And then when you turn it back on, then it's enabled again in the menu and you're able to choose which image stabilization mode you want. Okay, next option, we're going to come down here to the setup menu and then go to sound setup. I would definitely recommend disabling the self timer sound. You're not going to want to listen to that. All right, then we have some options here for the electronic shutter. Now you can, change, the sound that is used, and the camera is actually going to preview the different sounds, if you can hear that. Personally, I just keep it on sound 1 and turn the volume down a little bit, set it to that. But, if you don't want any sound at all, you can just turn that off. But I like hearing the shutter, so I keep that on. Otherwise, I turn everything off because I just don't want to be, I don't want to be hearing anything when I'm in the field shooting. Okay, then we press the display back button here to go back to the beginning of the setup screen. And we're going to come down here to power management. And you can set auto power off to, whatever duration you want. I keep it on 2 minutes. That works well for me. Performance. This is something I would recommend keeping the default value of normal with. You really only need boost when you are shooting handheld, doing like high burst photography, all that kind of stuff. But definitely keep that in normal to conserve battery life. Auto power save on. And this will automatically dim the LCD screen on the back of the camera when it's not active, when you're not actively using it. And that'll help just conserve power and your battery a little bit more, which is obviously important. Okay, then finally, I recommend just pressing the drive mode button here on the back of the camera. Make sure you are currently set to still image. It should be, that is the default value. But with that set, plus the other settings, we now have a custom mode, C1 on the mode dial, that will capture lossless 16-bit single images with a 2-second timer with IBIS turned off, which is perfect for when the camera is mounted to a tripod. As you can see, the screen dimmed a little bit on the back because now we have that auto power save enabled. So that'll help conserve battery life when I'm out in the field shooting. Okay, so now let's move on to C2. Now, this is where things get rather interesting with these cameras. You may be thinking, oh man, I don't want to go back and reset up all of this all over again for, this second mode. Well, guess what? You don't have to do that. If we come up here to image quality, and then we're going to come back down to edit, save, custom setting. C1 is our shooting single images on a tripod mode. And actually, let's just go ahead and rename it. So you can come into here, go to Edit Custom Name, go into Press Set. And now if we go back, now we have tripod single assigned to C1. Now for C2, I want all the same settings that I used with C1, but I want to shoot with a different drive mode. I want to set up C2 for capturing HDR images. Well, fortunately, this is really easy to do. We just come in here to C1, we go to Copy, and then we're going to copy the settings over into Custom 2. And it's going to ask if I want to do that. And I'm going to say OK. And now it's named the same, but we can obviously change that. Okay, and now C2 is set up for tripod HDR. Now we need to remember to change the mode dial up here on top. We're going to flip this over to C2. And now I'm in C2. I can come over here to drive mode, go down to BKT in the left menu. That stands for bracket. And we're going to choose the first option, which is AE bracket. That is auto exposure bracket. Click OK. If you want to customize how those images are bracketed, you come over here to the shooting settings menu, which is the camera option here. Come in here, scroll down here and choose AE bracket setting. And then in here, we have 3 options, beginning with frames step setting. If we come into here, this is where you're able to change how many additional exposures the camera creates in this mode and how many stops apart they are. And personally, I like just keeping this at plus or minus 3 frames. That works well for me. That means 1 normally exposed image plus 1 over and 1 under. But if you want more or less, obviously you can do that if you want to. I keep mine at plus and minus 3, but then I definitely change the stops because by default it is set to like 1/3 of a stop, which just isn't enough, I think. So I set mine to 2 stops, and you can see the little tick marks down here at the bottom, moving further apart and coming closer together as you change the number of stops. And I like doing 2 because the camera has a lot of dynamic range. To me, it's not really worth just shooting a little bit over and a little bit under. If I'm going to bracket my exposure, I may as well be somewhat, I don't know, aggressive with it, I may as well take advantage of it. So I do 2 stops over and under, but if you want, you could do that to 1 stop, whatever you like. Then come back out here to the main menu again, and we want to make sure this is set to continuous, so it shoots all images at once. And then we have sequence setting. Now this is interesting because here you can control the order in which these exposures are created. So 0 means just normal exposure, and then you have plus and minus. If you have a particular order in which you like for them to be created so that when you import your images later into Lightroom, you like how they look and how they're, how they're organized. Personally, I just keep this at the default setting, but feel free to change that if you want to. Couple additional things here I want to point out. If we come back to the menu system, go to image quality, and then come down here to our custom settings. I'm going to go into tripod single and then select edit check. Now, when you do this, this is going to display a menu that looks almost exactly the same as the main menu that we saw before. But up here at the top, you will see it says edit check. So this is a menu that just allows you to go in and confirm which settings are currently assigned to this custom mode and make any changes that you want to. So in addition to this video, I've also written a rather extensive blog post containing all of the information presented in this video. So if you would like to check that out, I will link to that down below in the video description. Also, if there's anything I missed, if you have any tips or recommendations of your own, please take a moment and leave a comment down below in the comment section. I would greatly appreciate it, and I know other people would appreciate it as well. Thanks so much for being here. Hope you enjoyed the video. I will see you next time.